My name is Tina McAndrew. I'm the library director at Randall, and welcome to tonight's session of Sustainable Stow. As I just said, this is being recorded, so you can watch it later. Please keep yourselves muted just so that we can hear the presentation clearly. Feel free to put any potential questions or comments in the chat. It will be monitored. If you feel you have a pressing question to ask while Justin is speaking, feel free to do that. He may wait to answer you as he may cover the topic later. But without further ado, I will hand it over to Arnie.
Yes, thank you, Tina.
You're welcome.
I'm Arnie Epstein. I chair the Stow Green Advisory Committee, and I'm also the Stow representative to the board of Hudson Light Power, which we also call HLPD. Which is our electric utility. As Tina mentioned, Justin will do a presentation. We're thinking of keeping questions pending till the end of the presentation, but if you have something that you feel is really pressing, then you can raise your virtual hand or put something in the chat during the presentation. As you may know, Hudson Light Power brought on a new general manager last spring, Justin Connell. When I suggested to Justin that the monthly climate talk would be a good way to get to talk about what HLPD offers today and plans for the future, as well as an opportunity to hear from Stow residents, he immediately said that would be a great idea. Justin has over 20 years of experience supporting community-owned utilities. As general manager of HLPD, his goal is to guide us through a time of accelerated grid transformation, ensuring reliable electric service in the most economical and environmentally friendly way possible. So with that, I'll hand it over to Justin. Thank you, Justin.
Thank you, Arnie, and thank you, Sustainable Stow, and obviously Arnie for setting this up. I did put a handful of slides together that are probably at a higher level of kind of the direction of where the department's at, as well as some of the immediate initiative, but hopefully some information that's going to prompt some thinking and just good discussion, because my intention with this is to take back as much feedback as I can and make sure that we're incorporating everything we can to our plan moving forward. And to the extent that I don't have as specific or focused information on certain topics that we'd like to talk about, I'm happy to come back on a periodic basis or sometime in the future to report back on that stuff and focus on there. So like Arnie said, if there are questions that arise in the moment, I'm happy to either address them, or if we have information in the slides that's coming up, we're going to try and delay that. But without further ado, I'll just get started. So again, probably many of you are familiar with Hudson Light Power and perhaps the history, but as a brief intro, Hudson Light is a community-owned municipal utility. So for over 1 century, it actually, I think, goes back to 1895, the original Hudson Light Power, which was a for-profit entity that was later purchased by the town and created into a nonprofit. It was really when it was created. But like Arnie said, it is our mission to provide the most reliable electric service to our customers in the most economical and environmentally friendly way possible. So many of you are probably, again, familiar with this, but Hudson Light and Power is a public power entity. And public power does mean that it is a community-owned and operated system that distributes energy to its residents. And for over 100 years, not just Hudson Light and Power, but consumer-owned not-for-profit electric utilities have brought low-cost, reliable electric service to customers throughout the United States. Nationally, 1 out of 4 customers is served by a public power company that is owned and operated by local or state governments or rural cooperatives. In Massachusetts, there are 41 municipal light plants that all operate under the very similar business models, a little bit different governance structures, but are really united at the end of the day. And within Massachusetts, I believe the collective light departments represent about 15% of the overall kilowatt hour sales or load throughout the Commonwealth. So to really drive it home, community owned means we are not for profit and locally controlled and governed. So what we do, I'm a pretty simple individual, but from the outside looking in, we deliver electricity and we recover our costs. We are not for profit. We don't have shareholders. Everything that we do collect through our rates is really just rate basing and recovery. And we energize customers and communities by providing sustained, low cost, clean electric energy with exceptional reliability. And kind of broad overview of how we do it is I generally tend to break things down between function, structure, and behavior. We always identify what is our function at the end of the day. So we've talked about delivering reliable, low cost, clean energy to our customers and ratepayers throughout the communities. How we measure that or how we define that is really looking at our affordability indices. How much money is coming out of people's pockets at the end of each month to support their electric bill compared to that of other light departments or investor-owned utilities. And that's how we measure that. We also look at reliability. So again, into some of the classic reliability metrics, we generally break that down to CAFE and CAIDI, which stand for Customer Average Interruption Frequency Indexes. So how often is someone losing power on average? And then supporting that CAIDI, Customer Average Interruption Duration. So how many times is a customer losing power or a customer is losing power? And then how long is that power out for? Looking at what's the magnitude of the interruption and then how effective are our restoration efforts. So when we think of and sustainability, right? So generally we've always just measured that as what is the emissions factor of our power supply portfolio. That's been the classic measurement. That's obviously evolving and gaining kind of increased scope of how we look at how do we make more of a difference. We think about structure, right? We always have people, process, and tools. So making sure we have the right size organization, the right types of resources who are skilled to be able to perform their jobs. And we do that cost effectively, keeping rates low, the right processes in place so that we can address certain issues or improve the system or our reporting capabilities or information out to customers, and the tools that we acquire and maintain to be able to support those efforts. And then on the behavior side, we're measuring, are we doing a good job? So went into it a little bit, where are our rates compared to that of our quote unquote competition or other benchmarks? How do our reliability metrics stack up against our benchmarks or competitors, if you will? I shouldn't use that term because they really aren't, but it kind of paints a picture. And then where is our power supply portfolio from an emissions perspective? And we're always evaluating, are we doing a good job today? And are we heading in the right direction based on future needs and expected needs? And that's how we're doing our capital planning, for which we're funding through our rates today. So when you break down our business life cycle, talked about, we really are just a cost recovery business. So we have channels of cost structure that we stack on top of each other that enables our business model. So we purchase wholesale or bulk electric power from either the ISO grid operator, some local resources, whether it's behind the meter solar, or we have longstanding project entitlements or ownership rights into facilities such as the nuclear units like Seabrook as well as Millstone. And we also have entitlements through the Niagara Power Project or NYPA up in upstate New York, Niagara Falls. We have to pay transmission costs to bring that power across the bulk power system and into our Forest Avenue substation behind the corporate headquarters there on Forest Avenue. And there's a cost to transporting that electricity at the wholesale level. From there, we're really stepping that bulk power down, and we're then distributing it through our other substation as well as our distribution infrastructure that we have a cost to maintain and build out, as well as staff to support outage restoration and general system maintenance and things like that. So that's really our cost basis at the end of the day. And then as far as the revenue recovery, we're delivering that electricity. There's a retail billing component, and we do offer retail programs such as rebates or incentives or other types of things. And so we collect those funds on the retail side from the customer base, and they really just come back to us to pay our next set of bills from either ISO New England or some entitlement from a power supply resource. It's oversimplified, but that's really what we do at the end of the day. So when we think about where our scorecard is today, on the left-hand side, you'll see it basically a graph that stacks the typical monthly residential bill for customers across the Commonwealth. The yellow bars at the top and on the left-hand side, those represent the investor-owned utilities on a 12-month average rate from January 2023 through December 2023. So a little different. I could have updated this, I apologize, but it really hasn't changed that much. So a typical customer in Unitil over that period was paying on average $320 a month for using 750 kilowatt hours. If you go down the stack in the blue, that's the stack of all those 41 municipal light departments and where those bills are in relation. If you go all the way down, Hudson during that period was actually the lowest, not by much compared to other utilities, but a typical customer in Hudson paid about $103.50 per month. So that's when we talk about our affordability metrics and affordability indices, that's just where we stack up. We do run a very lean shop. We're very fortunate to have a lot of the power supply resources that have been contracted for over a long period of time. And this is the net result of that. This just reflects, here's how much we have to charge customers in order to recover the revenue to support our operation and the expense structure that we have today. On the sustainability side, for the period of 2022, and again, dated, so I apologize, it's actually a little bit better based on some factors we can talk about, but generally we're about 90% non-emitting between traditional renewable resources or carbon-free entitlements through our participation and ownership entitlements in the Seabrook and Millstone facilities, as well as some of the hydropower coming from the NYPA or Niagara Power Project. That changes a little bit. We can get into it based on outages from a particular unit, our kilowatt hour sales, and how does that relate to our sales volume can vary quite a bit from weather, but our power supply resources do not really vary too much on a regular basis due to weather. The sun can obviously factor things. If there's a wet winter, then we have more water flow at the end of the day. We're getting more output from our hydro resources, but fairly fixed. It's really dependent upon how many kilowatt hour sales we realized, and that's based generally on what was the weather like for that given sales period. So on the reliability component, so these are some of the classic reliability metrics that are out there. So we talked about CAIDI, or our customer average interruption duration index. So on average, how many interruptions or power outages do our customers experience? And it's measured in minutes. So National Grid is generally around 180 minutes or 190 minutes for this time period, or national average, excuse me. National Grid is around 114 minutes. We stack up around 73 minutes. So a lot of different components there. There's obviously geographical changes and different business models. We're very fortunate that most of our line crews we actually have a residing requirement to live within X amount of miles of the department to support certain response times. And we have a very structured and robust on-call rotation to make sure we have the resources available to respond to any interruptions. Combined with our AMI system, we have great access to real-time data to sometimes see when a power outage or an interruption happens before a customer might realize it, frankly, in the middle of the night if they're sleeping. So when you combine that with the pretty sharp response time, it certainly helps us in these areas. System average interruption duration index, so same thing, but for the entire system. So this is where if there was a big ice storm that took down basically the feed to the entire town, or the majority of the town in the different circuits, but a lot of different factors. National average 105 minutes, National Grid 143 minutes, Hudson Light Power 37 minutes. And on the system average interruption frequency, we see national average about 1.3, National Grid 1.25, Hudson Light Power half. So that basically means the whole town, we never want it to go out, but if it does happen, it has happened once every other year, basically. So not too bad. I do want to just highlight, and perhaps it's for discussion or just thoughts, questions later. From a reliability perspective, the number one contributor to this metric or hindrance of this metric is basically trees falling down, and all driven by vegetation management. And so we're very sensitive to shade tree and just tree coverage in general with its environmental benefits. but it's in direct conflict sometimes with, especially honestly in Stow, with the topography and the number of trees, where that is the number one contributor to power outages. So we've been kicking around ideas of how do we do the appropriate vegetation management and tree trimming while minimizing or not impacting environmental benefit of trees. So can we combine perhaps more tree trimming with a robust tree planting program to replace what we're trimming at the end of the day, to make it strategic in that we're improving the reliability. So food for thought. We're going to formalize something and have some more discussions with town leadership and others to figure out, make sure we're doing the right thing and just making things better overall. But that is a fairly significant contributor to the reliability in general. So on the distribution side, this is really where we have control of most of the operation. So this is the original distribution infrastructure for Hudson Light and Power. Hudson Light and Power, if you go to Hudson down Cherry Street, there's an old power plant with some units that are still operational that never actually really run. They might be a couple of hours a year, but that is where the original power supply used to be generated from. So back in 1897 or thereabouts, we had one distribution circuit. We had our power supply coming from the generation at the Cherry Street power plant. And the original customer base was 22 customers, and we had 25 streetlights. But that's how it all started. So as we look today, we have 12 distribution circuits. We have 3 distinct circuit voltages. And we have a power supply that's directly connected from ISO New England to our Forest Avenue substation. I put an asterisk here around 3 distinct circuit voltages because not the original, but that footprint that I showed you the slide before, that's much older style, older wires, transformers. So the voltage is actually much lower than the newest section of the distribution system. And we're in the process of upgrading those voltages, and there's a lot of benefits to doing that, but still some of that exists today. There's also 2 other circuits throughout the Hudson system that are 8320. So again, we just need to do system conversions there. That'll allow for additional reliability and capacity in general and bring everything up to a uniform voltage level. And that helps us also from a system planning, spare part management perspective, and making sure we can really have a centralized voltage to focus on. And we have a lot of, probably our biggest effort going on right now is we are heavily modifying our main substation that interconnects with ISO New England. I got some slides there, but I did put 2 concentric ellipses here. And we had some discussion. Stow is fed by 2 circuits at the end of the day, 2 out of those 12. One of them runs up Gleasondale, the other one runs up Hudson Road. So the light blue one here runs up Gleasondale. We're actually planning for the summer. Many of you probably realized or seen that we have double poles that sit along Gleasondale. Our plan that we're putting together for this coming year is to replace the existing conductors that run up Gleasondale. So that'll increase not only the reliability, but the system capacity of how much power we can deliver to really the eastern part of Stow. We're also, while we're doing that, going to pull an additional circuit because our overall plan is to break Stow into 4 different distribution circuits. So we should be able to more than double the capacity from where it sits today. It will also help from a reliability perspective of having the ability to backfeed in the event of certain outages on different circuits. So our plan is to do that work going forward this coming summer. And then on the left-hand side of that light green line that runs up there, circled by the dotted ellipse, that's the other circuit that runs up Hudson Road. So our plan is to effectively do the same work perhaps in the next 2 to 3 years. We're doing our capital planning and kind of grid planning right now, but the same idea where we'd upgrade and replace the existing circuit there, as well as add an additional one to increase capacity, as well as increase redundancy in the event that we did have to or needed the ability to backfeed part of the system if there was a big tree that came down to minimize the outage impact. I will say, and I'll get into this a little bit, that Stow is electrifying quicker than Hudson. Probably not surprising there. So as we think about system expansion and capacity expansion, this really does align with that priority as well. So more to come on that, but that's kind of the immediate fix, or not an immediate fix, but immediate improvements that should show enhanced reliability as well as capacity on the Stow side of the circuits. And talking about increased capacity and reliability, when I talk about the effort we have going on with the Forest Avenue substation right now, this is kind of a pretty significant effort that's going to allow for largely a complete electrification effort, at least on the wholesale side. There's many other components that we're going to have to address along the way, but this is arguably the toughest one that needs to be addressed. So for those of you who are electrical engineers, I am one, but I'm not very good. What this is a one-line diagram, and you don't really need to be able to study this or understand the drawing, but what we have is in the top part of the diagram is we have two overhead high voltage transmission lines that come in from National Grid. One is, we call it the N166, and one is the H160 line. Those come into the main Hudson substation, where we have breakers that can isolate both of those lines. And then on our side as well, we have a bus tie breaker. So what that means is we have capacity from both lines, and we have the ability to backfeed in the event of an outage of one of those lines and still maintain system power. Now, we always like as a utility to look at contingency and always follow an N+1 at least contingency, meaning that if we lost one feed or one line or one piece of equipment, we always have at least one additional route to be able to continue operation or maintain business continuity. So that meets this, and this has been a great setup for a long time. Actually, these lines went in, I found out in 1977, and then in the early 2000s, we did a significant upgrade in the substation as it sits today. But these lines are axially fed, meaning that they're coming from one direction and dead ending with us. And these lines at some point are on single transmission poles. So we do have single points of failure in our feed into the system. We are under this structure as well, what's called local network service customers of National Grid. And it's not inexpensive to be a local network service customer. So that adds additional expense to our cost structure. But starting, and you all probably know this way better than I, 16 years ago or thereabouts, there was this idea that was called the Greater Boston Reliability Project, where an additional line was going to be brought in from Eversource to Hudson to be able to backfeed National Grid and support the substation that's downstream of here. And there's in general a load pocket. So a lot of permitting, a lot of legal issues, a lot of things and efforts in general that are finally now coming to a head, where we broke ground on this project that I'll get into and have actually landed the new, I'll get right into it, a new underground high voltage transmission line that comes from the Eversource Sudbury station into Hudson. And we're building what's called a ring bus, 6-position ring bus at Forest Avenue substation, so that we have 3 feeds now, one of which is from a totally different utility and is underground, that allows us to be what's called radially fed. So interestingly enough, this is unique to all of New England. We're the only entity that has the system, the structure going forward. So there's a lot of on-the-fly learning of how we address this. The way this looks electrically, or how Hudson's going to look electrically, is that Eversource is going to be flowing power from themselves through us right out to National Grid. And we're kind of just taking a little bit off Eversource in general. We have the ability to take from National Grid when the power is flowing from that direction based on all the dynamics in the system. But we are now a transmission owner at the level of Eversource and National Grid. And instead of being a local network service customer from National Grid, we are a regional network service customer of all of ISO New England. So when you combine that with the fact that we'll be radially fed, where power can come from either direction, and based on us building what's called the 6-position ring bus, we have an incredible amount of redundancy including and especially with an underground line coming from Eversource, a totally different utility that should make our reliability that much even stronger. On top of that, this new Eversource line is actually, the line itself by engineering rating is rated for 400 megawatts. So that's almost 8 times more than what Hudson's current peak demand is. Now, we can't utilize all of that right now because, again, going back to the contingency risk, and we always want to have an N+1 or a backup. So if we did get up to 400 megawatts and that line went out, the 2 existing lines could not support that load. So as we think about long-term capital planning, that is on our planning horizon to say, well, what is the plan and what are the trigger points to invest the capital to potentially upgrade then those lines. But this is supposed to wrap up by August, September of next year. We just did complete phase 1. Well, we'll complete phase 1 on Monday. We've energized the line, done all the testing, and then we will close our substation, the points between National Grid and Eversource, and actually be flowing power through Eversource, through Hudson, out to National Grid. So that's a fairly significant effort, just that phase of the first phase of the project. But a lot of benefits to the utility, certainly. So when we do talk about so much what we do is planning, generally when you look at integrated resource planning, everything comes back to demand forecasts. And when we look at that, we look at historical loads typically, we'll do some weather normalization, we'll look at customer count, per capita usage, which is a big deal, right? Especially as we think about electrification and conversion of transportation as well as heating and cooling, also heating to electric. That's what we have to be able to plan for. What is that future state going to be? And then what is the adoption rate in that increase in load forecast? How is that going to come on? And how do we make sure that we're focused on the right circuits, whether it be Stow or others, where we're going to need that capacity the first, because we can only do so much at any given time based on the size of our operation, frankly, at the end of the day. So what's in front of you is our 2023 demand profile on an hourly basis. We'll call that an 8760 profile. And for 2023, we peaked at about 48 megawatts. That was our system peak. It happened September. I think it was Labor Day, heat wave. And this is oversimplified. So it's somewhat illustrative, but definitely representative, I think, of the way that we're thinking and planning about the challenges in front of us. So we currently have about 13,400 customers. I think 12,000 or thereabouts are residential. So there's commercial, very little industrial, but for this exercise, it's going to work. So if you break that down on average, during that peak hour, our customers used on average about 3.6 kilowatts consistently across the hour. So we know that's not the case, right? Because appliances come on and off. We have some larger customers, some smaller customers, but it's helpful exercise, because where I'm going next with this is as we think about things like power supply, and the video thing is over some of my notes here. When we overlay our main power supply resource, which is really that of Seabrook, we have about a 20 megawatt entitlement through ownership, which is around the clock. It hardly ever goes down other than for refueling outages. We overlay that with our load profile and say, okay, in general, that's a pretty significant resource, covers about 75% of our needs on a total annual average basis. Now, what's not on here is some of our behind the meter solar resources, our NIPA entitlements for hydro, and a few other things, but this is by far and large the most significant. So we do think about how do we cover things like the outage risk and what do we do for coverage there? How do we optimize our load profile, whether through battery storage, customer behavior, other types of load flexibility, but we have fixed resources as it is. How do we start thinking more so about load profile optimization? So if we take that a step further and say, where we are today is we peak at 50 megawatts or 48 megawatts. On average, our customers are about 3.6 kilowatts across that entire peak hour. We have to assume, again, just scenario planning, that what happens if every account or everybody gets just one EV charger, which arguably people are going to get more than one EV charger, and some businesses are going to get certainly more than that. the average customer load jumps to about 10.8 kilowatts if everyone gets a level 2 charger. I'm trying to remember off the top of my head. I think on average, those pull about 7.2 kW or thereabouts. So unmitigated, and there's all these coincident factors. So this would probably never happen, but it certainly is a possibility. Our customer load on average triples, as does our system load. So now at some point in the future, without thinking about heat pumps and electrification of heating and some of the other appliances and everything, we say that at some point, however it happens, we have to plan for perhaps 150 megawatt system load. Right now, our transformers are rated for about a third of that, maybe a little bit more, of which we have 3 of them. We have 12 distribution circuits. Each one can only handle so many megawatts of load based on the conductor size. But we need to start thinking about, back to my comments before, if this is coming on, particularly in Stow, how fast is it coming on? We have a great AMI system that tracks infrastructure, but we need to get in front of this stuff because it can take 2 years to procure some of the materials or do the planning or get the funding. And furthermore, we still see a 3 to 4 year lag on a lot of the transformers that we need to enable this transformation, let alone some of the other switchgear and other components. So there's a whole lot of moving parts as far as trying to predict or forecast what's our load growth going to be and when is that going to hit a pinch point with our existing infrastructure. When do we make the decision now to deploy the capital to procure the equipment that may or may not show up in 3 or 4 years? And on top of that, we may not see load growth materialize as quickly as we once thought, largely due to whether it's administration changes, legislative changes, what have you. So that's all the uncertainty that we're dealing with, and we're trying to be as flexible as we can and as kind of realistic with ourselves, while also making sure that we're always prepared for what we might face. So part of that and what we're going to look at in 2025 is a comprehensive rate structure. I think we have like 13 or 14 different rates. And for example, so I think we should only have like 4 or 5 in all honesty, but to be determined by rate study and many other stakeholders involved in this. Our current residential rate structure has a customer charge, which I think is about 8.1 cents a kilowatt hour, or a customer charge of about, I think it's $4. I should know that, but $4 no matter how much you use, and you get the first 140 kilowatt hours for free. Then you have a rate that's really meant to cover the distribution costs and the costs that we can control at the department, which is about 8.1 cents. And then a power adjustment charge that is supposed to cover wholesale commodity costs at the end of the day, which is around 6.1 cents, at least starting in January. So all in, we are about 14 cents a kilowatt hour. Energy distribution, all the charges all in. But is that appropriate? One, do we have the right costs and the right buckets to be validated and perhaps re-engineered? But then two, do we have the right types of charges within that rate structure, given we're trying to replicate our cost causation structure at the utility level? Because I would say 40% of our costs are largely peak demand driven. So should there be more emphasis put on a peak demand type charge? Is our customer charge appropriate, given that whether you use 1 kilowatt hour or a million kilowatt hours, there's still a fixed cost component of keeping the department up and running to be able to service that account. In the distribution charge, do we have the right costs in that bucket? And is it really just reflective of the distribution infrastructure charge and maintaining and building and servicing the distribution lines? And then an energy type charge for what is truly the volumetric charge of the cost of the electrons that you're utilizing. And going back to like things like a demand charge, very appropriate. It does reflect largely cost causation that we realize at the department, but a demand charge at the residential level, that's not necessarily a accepted practice, at least to date, with a lot of utilities. But is it something we should at least be discussing and thinking, does this send the right consumer behavior? We're going to take a look at things like time of use rates and what does that look like if you just break it down based on what's your definition of a peak set of hours across Monday through Friday? Is it a 2 hour span, 4 hour span? What do the rest of the hours look like? And how does that help electrification or not at the end of the day? I won't bore you with this, but part of the entire electrification effort and discussion is we are looking at all of our program historical activity based on our rebate levels, our marketing efforts to see what has the adoption rate been. Are our incentives consistent with other light departments? Definitely not with Mass Save, but we can get into some of those differences. And how do we stress test if we were to increase rebates? How much more adoption would we see? But then also factoring in, if we give more money out, we have to charge more money through the rates. And does that put incremental burden on lower moderate income customers who, whether your rebate is $500 or $1,000 for an EV charger, they still can't go and afford the EV at the end of the day, or a heat pump at the end of the day. They don't have access to the capital or the capital on hand to do the project in its entirety. So again, not that we're going to solve it right away, but we are thinking about how do we look at, in the context of our rate studies and our socioeconomic and just demographics in general across the service territory, how do we create the most equitable rate structures as well as incentives to support this transition while honoring the reliability, the affordability, but also certainly the environmental benefits that we can provide over time. But I think everyone is balancing some of these questions at the end of the day, and it's a matter of prioritization where how do we incorporate all of our efforts around affordability, reliability, and sustainability for overall customer fulfillment, understanding what does our customer base look like, and how do we make sure that folks aren't left behind, but we're also doing the right thing and moving forward. And that's today, and certainly as we move into the future. So that's kind of what I had put together. And I know it's at a high level, but hopefully spark some questions or discussions, and we can kind of get into it.
All right. If anyone has a question, and I don't know if we want to continue to have screen share or
Sorry.
You could raise your hand or put a question in the chat, or I guess just speak up. We have a question from Ken Steele. How much is the solar rebate?
I believe it's $1.25 up to per watt up to, it might be $7,500, I would say. I'm gonna check the website. I've only been here for 6 months. I'm gonna use that excuse as much as I can, but in all seriousness, let me check that right now. $1.20 per installed watt, up to 50% of the project cost to a maximum of $7,500.
And I can just make a comment there that I believe the average cost of installing residential rooftop solar today is on the order of between $3 and $3.50 a watt. So that dollar, you said $1.25 or $1.20?
$1.20 per watt, up to $7,500, up to 50%.
That's over. I think that's over a third of your cost would be taken away from the rebate. Let's see.
Well, this is a simple one, Arnie, while you're reading.
Okay.
Question from Trish: will a recording of this presentation be made available to all? Answer is yes. It'll be on Sustainable Stow's channel on Stow TV, and so you should be able to see it there in about 2 or 3 days. Yep, and Tina answered you also. Thank you, Tina.
Okay. I did see, let's see, I'm scrolling past a couple of questions here. And there was another question from Ken Steele. Maybe, Ken, you can take yourself off mute about the solar rebate totals on your spreadsheet. Could you?
Yeah. So I really had two questions. One of them was when you were doing the spreadsheet and had the rebate totals. That would what prompted me to ask about solar, because I didn't see it on the spreadsheet. I was just curious. Does that count? I mean, are you counting that as rebates, or is that a different category?
No, we didn't count that. That's more on the traditional rebate side, like heat pumps, EV chargers, even lawn equipment, things of that nature.
Okay. Yeah, I have taken advantage of your solar rebate in the past, so I appreciate that. The other question I have that I think I talked to Arnie about before is for the public utilities, there is support for home batteries, so that during peak power times, the homeowner can get paid to supply that power. And I've been interested in getting a battery, partially for my own reliability, but I would also like to see it help reduce Hudson Light and Power's peak demand if possible. Do you have thoughts on that kind of program?
No, we are looking to establish one. We don't really have one yet. And part of this is a little bit of the chicken and the egg of how do you incentivize that, right? Where it's a direct type of rebate combined with some form of like performance payment to be able to charge off peak and discharge the battery on peak. Or do you set up some form of a time of use program where, again, illustrative numbers, the off peak rate is 5 cents per kilowatt hour, on peak rate is 30 cents a kilowatt hour. So you as the owner of the device can effectively arbitrage and manage or benefit your electric bill at the end of the day. But that is something that we're actively working on right now.
Yeah, I think some system like that would be very useful. And I sort of see them as two separate things. One of them is time of use charges that you can then daily arbitrage. But then also this, like you said, there's a peak period where it affects the total cost of the system, where you could say, hey, for these 4 hours tomorrow, we're going to use your battery and we'll pay you $2 a kilowatt hour, whatever works out. But I think that would incentivize people to get batteries and then also then provide them to Hudson Light and Power to be useful.
No, absolutely. That is something we're working on. So I appreciate you bringing that up.
Okay, great. Thanks.
All right. The question from Greg. Greg, I'd ask you to come off mute too, if you can, because it's kind of an involved question.
Yeah. Okay. You talked about two circuits going into Stow and going up to 4, and I'm guessing do they serve people in Hudson along the way before they get here? And are those 400 amp circuits now? And then are the new ones going to be higher? Are they going to be 4 times 400? I guess.
Yes. So a couple of questions. That I don't think that there's really any. I don't think they serve any customers in Hudson. There might be a couple of laterals that come off there. I don't think so though. But to your point, these lines will be upgraded they'll be rated at 580. I think they're 480 now with the 4-aught. But that being said, we are going to take a look at all of the fusing and the protection schemes down the line, as well as looking at, at some point, we largely use fuses at the end of the day, but we'll be starting to incorporate more traditional reclosing activity, even if it's just interruption protection and trip saver. So we're looking at the entire system, but the entire circuit, I should say, all the way back from the feeder breaker to the end of the lines.
Okay.
And Justin, as a follow-up to that, I have a question. If one of those, you were saying earlier that Stow is sort of divided up today into sort of 2 sectors based on those 2 distribution lines. Is there any resiliency associated with one of those distribution lines going down and the other one being able to support the other area of Stow that's typically fed from the other distribution line?
There is. We have some system interconnect capability up on Great Road, so where we can bridge the 2 systems together. And then on the more southern parts, we can tie in with some of the Hudson circuits as well. So there is redundancy right now, but this will kind of enhance that and create more interconnection or resiliency points.
Right.
Arnie, you have a question here from Alan. How much money is returned to Hudson each year, and what is the current payment to the town of Stow?
That's the, Alan, you're referring to the payment in lieu of taxes, is that right? Alan, you can take yourself off.
Yes, that's right.
So I can go ahead. So the Stow payment is based off kilowatt hour sales, and I think it's generally about, I'm gonna put my foot in my mouth, $130,000 a year or thereabouts. And and it's a load ratio share, so there's more kilowatt hour sales in Hudson. I believe Hudson gets around $220,000 or $225,000 per year.
Can I ask a second question?
Go for it.
Sure.
Okay, completely different focus on this one. So I live way up north on Red Acre Road, almost at the farthest end of, your service territory. And I don't know if we get more outages than anybody else, but they do seem to happen at some regularity. But I'm wondering whether I actually need to report these to you anymore. Is my meter now doing that automatically? Or if not, what's the best way for me to contact? By text, by email? A telephone doesn't seem to work much anymore.
There is a link on the website. So going all the way back to just about all of our meters have been converted to AMI. So we have real-time data to know if there's service or not, if there's a service interruption. When you get up, it's cellular based too. So part of the challenge might be, and I'll go back and confirm this, but if the cell service is bad, there may be an issue getting some of those updates all the way back to Hudson. But that being said, this kind of hones in on the challenge that we have, particularly in Stow, where the gross majority of power interruptions are caused by tree limbs coming down. And so there's been from my understanding, perhaps a hesitancy to do more vegetation management than less, as we're sensitive to the shade tree issues and just tree coverage in general. So that is something that we're looking at doing, if we can offset tree trimming by planting additional trees throughout the community. Does that offset kind of create a net neutral situation on the environmental side, but then fundamentally improve service reliability at the end of the day? So way up there, that probably is what's causing it. You probably don't need to report it, but it doesn't hurt the redundancy. We probably have it, but to give yourself confidence as well, if you go to the 1-800 number or the website, there is an ability to report there. But yeah, up there, it is challenging, but we're definitely aware of it. I'm going to put something together.
And Justin, I can speak to that a little bit. I've had questions from several Stow residents, similar to the one that Alan just asked about, whether, when there's an outage at his home, should he call your emergency line, or should he just assume that you know about it? Do people know about this map that you have? What I've found is that, some people know about it and some people are not aware of it.
No, that's a good point. I didn't mention that. So to be confident that it is at least recognized or reported, if you go to the Hudson website, the HLP website, there is outage information, and then you'll see an icon that says outage map. If you click that, you should see in your general area that there is in fact an outage, and that should be comfort in knowing that we know about it and we probably already dispatched crews. Thank you.
Jen Sylvester just posted what she thinks is the link for reporting outages there in the chat.
That's it. And then I'll put the, link to the actual outage map as well.
I see a hand up from David Karen Gray. David?
Yes, I had kind of an off-the-wall question here. When we get calls offering to try to sell us from National Grid or some other commercial power company, I usually tell them that it's not even available here and they shouldn't have our exchange on their list. Am I accurate in that?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
So I've got a different question, and you can rule this out of bounds if you want. Either you or Arnie can rule this out of bounds, but you may know that a few years ago we had a Heat Smart program, which involved a special state level program, and many people who remember it pretty fondly and wish it would come back. And then we have a lot of people who've moved into the town recently who don't know anything at all about how they can get some financial support for installing heat pumps in their home. I know this is a difficult question. You guys don't have the same rate structure as National Grid and Eversource. But do you think there's any answer that we can give those people in the future? We're the front line. We're the people that promote heat pumps. We're the people that get those questions. What help can you give us?
So we have engaged with two firms. I think both of them were a big part of the Heat Smart program. You guys are probably familiar with them, CET and I want to say Abode. So we're working with them to get proposals to figure out what we could potentially do to enhance marketing and just awareness in general of this type of stuff. So I don't have an answer yet on that, but I know the incentives themselves are on the website, but furthermore, we did add something on the website that shows what the kilowatt hour rate is, because we still do, well, we need to do everything we can to incentivize efforts like this. The biggest effort that we can make or incentive that we can offer is having the lowest electric rates in the Commonwealth, which should support obviously the economic decision to make the transition. So, I would reinforce that in the fact that it is largely carbon-free / renewable energy at the end of the day. So cheapest rates, not to toot our own horn, but also some of the cleanest electricity. So in the short term, that's helpful. The website has the rebates and incentives. But I'll have to get back to you on what a more formal program could look like. We're just doing that research, that due diligence right now.
We worked, our vendor was Boucher.
Okay.
Just FYI, that they were the one we chose. And this is not, a related incentive in that program at the time was interest-free loans. So I know we took one out. It had more to do with our insulation than with the heat pump itself, but it was a 7-year interest-free loan. It was like, yeah, why not? I know you'd have to partner with a bank to make that happen, but anyway.
Yeah, no, it's helpful. And I know DOER was going down a path of being able to offer some form of interest-free loan with utility contribution, whether it be on the direct rebate side or not. So let me see if that's gone anywhere. But that is part of the challenge. And I know it was frankly, it was a very different interest rate environment back then too. And like I've reiterated before, we're a nonprofit, so we're just, recovering our costs. So whatever we do come out at the end of the day above and beyond our cost structure raises rates. So that is just a balancing act. And I don't say that as a deterrence. It's just trying to figure out what is that mass balance of putting together the most effective and equitable structures together. But it's helpful to know the Boucher company as well.
Alan, I see your hand up. Is that another question or is that?
Yeah, it's another question, but it's a follow-up on a question that was just asked about these companies that are sending us letters in Stow. I just got one this week from a company called Tetra, offering, to come out and give me a heat pump installation assessment and telling me that Stow can take advantage of $10,000 in heat pump rebates. And I've gotten these letters before. I too have called up the companies and said, look, we live in Stow. We are not an Eversource or National Grid community, so we don't participate in this Mass Save program. Can you please not send me these anymore and stop sending them to people in the town of Stow? The letters keep coming, and I can only surmise that they keep sending them because there are some people in town who actually use their services. And then when they go to try to get the rebate, the companies probably say something like, oh gosh, you're in Stow. Well, I guess you're not eligible, but here's the link to the Hudson Light and Power rebates. They're not quite as generous, but I believe these things are a bit of a scam. And it would be nice if maybe in a newsletter or something, Hudson Light and Power could warn people about these letters that seem to keep coming, and maybe explain a little bit about the difference between Mass Save and your rebates.
No, that's helpful. We'll definitely do something along those lines.
I see a question from Greg. The question is, I think we touched on this at the beginning, any consideration of burying main distribution lines?
Yeah, I mean, what we're going to do is take a look at a high-level feasibility assessment, but incorporate what is the incremental cost of doing that. Depending upon there's so many factors, but it could be 10 times the cost of going overhead, especially with existing infrastructure that's there. And so it is something we're going to take a look at, but realistically, it's probably not something that we're going to pursue. There might be sections there where it makes sense, but we'll take a look. We are going to take a look at some of that. And on the next question, oh, sorry, I didn't mean to.
Okay, I was going to hand that to you, but this is from Carol. Is the grid set up to handle the electric needs from the new Masters Academy coming to Stow?
So in the short term, yes, but we're working with the developers because I think they want to put 2 ice rinks there. And that's obviously, if you're going to have that in the summertime, that's a significant electric load. So we're just awaiting to hear back from projected demand in general. But for the foreseeable future, before some of the more extreme build out happens, we are ready for that. And on top of looking at the Hudson Road circuits in general, that'll continue to or further bolster that.
There's also going to be a lot of night lighting. They anticipate doing games outside, soccer, etc., with night lights. So are you aware of that as well?
Yeah, and luckily with LEDs over the high pressure sodiums or the metal halide lights, it's significantly less, but we should have a good handle on that.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you.
I've got a larger question for you, Justin. You talked about, from the distribution side, how you might handle the additional load coming from Stow. How about the generation side, and what the impact do you foresee that might have on rates?
So it's a very good question, Arnie, because we are very well balanced from a supply perspective with our current demand profile. But as we talk about electrification, not just in Hudson, but across the region, there aren't enough resources to support electrification right now. And so the most significant efforts are going on around offshore wind with some pretty significant procurement targets in general. And there have been challenges on the pricing side from a supply chain interest rate perspective, where some of those bids have come in triple where they were 3 or 4 years ago. So there's some cost challenges that are being worked through right now. To put that in perspective, that Seabrook power that we have entitlement to is an all-in cost of 3 cents per kilowatt hour power. And that's firm, delivered, predictable, and dispatchable. Part of the challenge looking at some of the resources that are planned, and as we have to go out and procure more resources, is the offshore wind contracts look to be around 16 to 18 cents per kilowatt hour. Then those are intermittent resources with a little bit of bias towards off-peak production, i.e. producing when in the middle of the night when the demand may not be as high. So while the load profile is not as flexible as it needs to get to, incremental power that we have to go out on the system will be significantly more expensive than where our existing power supply portfolio exists today. But separate from cost challenges, obviously with a federal administration change is some of the rhetoric that's been thrown out there. Those are federal leases that those offshore wind farms are sitting on, as well as they're relying on a significant contribution from the IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act. And so depending upon what happens with those two components could make this very tricky, at least delay kind of the implementation of some of these resources or make them even more expensive at the end of the day. So we don't really have a crystal ball, right now, but it is something that we're watching very, very closely, especially as we think about there's generally an economy of scale for us having more kilowatt hour sales. But if we're having to go out and buy incremental power at 15 cents a kilowatt hour when our existing portfolio, some of those resources are at 3 cents a kilowatt hour, that could actually net increase our rates, even with selling more kilowatt hours. So I would say it's too tough of a question to answer right now. It's also interesting to think about cost causation in the ISO New England structure, because the way it sits today, everybody pays for it. So it's an hourly, really a 5-minute electricity market settled on an hourly basis and the day ahead and in real time during current day. But the price of electricity that everybody pays is set by the most expensive generator on at the time. And so you have to think about what is going to be the marginal resource going forward as the supply mix changes. If we're going to have and those generators are typically natural gas-fired combined cycles. So it's a fairly easy calculation, at least from a cost perspective. You have the cost of their fuel, their gas, times their heat rate conversion or their efficiency conversion to a delivered price of electricity. So that's easy to quantify, right, wrong, or indifferent. But as we move forward to a zero cost fuel resource supply stack, what is then setting the actual spot pricing of electricity and incentivizing behavior one way or the other? It becomes a fundamental question that I don't think ISO New England, they probably thought about it, but how do you send the right pricing signals based on real-time supply and demand kind of economics going on in real time? So a lot of it's going to depend on what is going to be the resource. How is ISO going to set pricing going forward with resources that have zero variable cost, but also knowing that they probably are going to have some form of balancing resource, like a ramping gas unit that maybe isn't producing power all of the time, but as the wind varies and the sun varies, that resource may have to ramp up and down to meet the system balancing requirements. Could there be a cost to could there be a cost of that resource that then sends that scarcity pricing signal or that surplus pricing signal? So I think I'm giving you the most complicated answer, and I apologize for that. But these are all the challenges that are going to have to be worked through. And it's not as much. Hudson is actually, I would say, Hudson Light Power in a better position than probably almost all the utilities that are out there right now. But that will absolutely change as we increase our demand and look for incremental resources. I'll say I can't share this actually, but obviously we have the old Intel facility on Reed Road there. That was Hudson Light Power's biggest customer at one point, and they were 27 megawatts. So that's more than half of where we are today. And that facility is down to about 1 megawatt, so a very small fraction of where it was. So we're selling less electricity in general, but we're diluting less of our power supply resource mix. So more of the customers get more, the remaining customers get more of our nuclear entitlements and hydro entitlements that are very economical right now. But it appears that the most probable tenants of that facility are data centers just based on interest. And these data centers are really looking for, we've heard numbers thrown out of 500-600 megawatts worth of demand. So, that's a fundamentally different ballgame that even with this new awesome substation project, we can't handle that and wouldn't be able to handle that for at least 15 years. And furthermore, the region, all of ISO New England, really can't handle that type of build out, certainly that fast. So everything is kind of coming to a head at this point. And there's going to have to be, I think, some hard conversations because it's, as we all know, it's going to take a lot of different resources from a diversity perspective, but overall install capacity. And do we start to have more conversation around whether it's new modular, nuclear reactor technology that acts as a base load resource, as well as much solar, wind, geothermal as we can bring to the table? Because when you look at the potential of transportation electrification, heating electrification, and now this prospective AI demand through data centers, our total grid, let alone the country, but for ISO New England, could quadruple. And we would have to build more generation, like 5-6-fold more generation than we have since the beginning of the electric grid in the shortest amount of time that anyone has ever anticipated. So it's a pretty tall order, right? And so, with all of these changes that are happening in real time, it starts to throw wrenches into what the plan is. So I don't think anybody has an answer, but we're certainly watching any and all technologies and developments to make sure that we do have a seat at the table, that the Hudson Light and Power customers, Stow, are always going to have the resources that we need, and we're sourcing the most economical and environmentally friendly supply resources that are available at the time when we have to go make those decisions. So I know it's a non-answer, but these are all the things that are floating through our minds as we think about, what does the supply resource look like, let alone and making sure we have the hard infrastructure, the poles, the wires, the transformers, the switchgear to support the load. We have to have the electrons that'll flow through there that are affordable and clean and reliable.
Okay. So are there any other questions? I don't see any more hands up. I don't see any other questions in the chat. Wait a minute. I think Ken?
Yeah, I was accidentally sending my question to somebody else by accident. I don't use Zoom that much. I was wondering if Hudson Light and Power has plans to have their own large-scale battery as part of your balancing system.
We do. So we're going to plan on doing an RFI, RFP type of solicitation. I would say end of next year.
And then the other question I was wondering about was do you know how much rooftop solar is currently generated in Stow, or sorry, in your customer base? And do you know how much?
Oh, sorry, go ahead. No, I want to say, I think we have about 350 systems installed that we know about, that at least that the rebate was provided for. And I don't know if you want to assume an average install of 10 kW per, but does that roughly call it 3 megawatts or thereabouts? I would say that's a good proxy.
And do you have an idea of how much rooftop solar could be generated, and like how much would that help provide this future supply that you're going to need?
So a couple things are going on. One, our power supply portfolio is largely saturated based on our current kind of kilowatt hour sales and demand profile with the amount of behind the meter resources we have. But one thing back to, I think it was your point around storage, is our peaks are shifting later and later, largely because of duck curve aspects and behind the meter solar. So we really don't have the room for the solar. We need to find a way to do the production shifting, charge the battery off the solar during the day. We really have two peaks. One, the morning ramp in the morning when everyone wakes up and turns on their hot water heater and stuff like that. You see a quick ramp in the morning, it dies back down. And then in the evening when the sun goes down and everyone gets home from work, starts cooking their food and taking showers, we see it peak up there again. So those are really the peak times that we're needing resources at the end of the day. And it's starting to be less and less coincident with radiance and solar production. But right now, without the shifting, which we're hoping to solve through things like grid scale solar, grid scale storage, excuse me, and doing some shifting of load around, we're really at a saturation point. It's a tough, like it's a good but bad problem to have, if you will, where we don't have any room because we have so many resources and they happen to be carbon free. So it's really more of like a balancing issue at this point, making sure production is happening commensurate with when load is peaking.
So when you're saying that you don't have room for more solar, you're saying that if customers put on more rooftop solar, you wouldn't be able to take advantage of that?
No, so we still support it, but what actually ends up happening is we push out, not physically, because a lot of these assets are financially kind of contracted for, but we push the solar out, and a lot of times we'll sell the cost of that solar at a loss, and then that flows back to the utility and raises the per kilowatt hour cost base. So we still have the solar program in place. We still support the installations. We know that it's tough to make solar economics work in general, if that's the way you're looking at it, because again, good problem to have. Your power supply portfolio is very cost effective, but we still do the rebate program and support those programs. It's just, it turns into a little bit of a subsidization because of the supply and demand dynamics of Hudson Light Power.
Yeah, I mean, I have sort of two aspects of this. One of them is I'm a customer, so yeah, I care about the economics and the incentive for my solar program, but I'm also trying to figure out how you make this the most efficient and incentivize people to say, okay, I should put in solar and battery, and then make that a more flexible load to Hudson Light Power.
We're on the same page, Ken. That's we'll be working on that for sure.
Okay, thanks.
All right. Don't see any other questions or hands. I don't know, Tina, I don't know, Tina, if you're still on. Do you want to wrap up, or we should just say
Sure,
thank you
I'm
to,
still here.
okay.
Yeah, thank you everyone for coming.
To
Usually
Justin
with a
and
quick wrap up.
yeah.
And like we said, I will send this video recording over to Stow TV and Jonathan will edit it. And usually he's pretty quick. It's usually up in a day or so. So it'll be available.
Well, thank you all. This was fun.
Yeah, thank you,
Hopefully I
Justin,
can
and
get to
thank
come
you
back.
for the offer to come back at some future date. I'm sure we'll have some more questions for you, and I'm sure you'll have some more information for us. So thank you.
Thank you,
Appreciate
Justin.
that.
All right.
Thank you all. Have a great
Good night,
night.
everybody.
Take care.
Thanks.